And it's
Good evening, everyone.
Yeah, yeah.
Huh? No, not yet. Yeah. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our next talk here during Lent. We're having the weekly meetings, and I'm sorry, there appears to have been. I get some feedback from people that there was some wrong information about the timing of tonight's talk. No, it was all good. Anyway, look, I did announce it last week. And God willing, we're having the next one next Sunday again. So today is the third Sunday. So we got fourth and fifth Sundays, 2 more Sundays to go, and then there'll be a break.
14 and 21.
Yes, break from Palm Sunday until, well after Easter, a number of weeks. Okay, so our topics we need to say the prayer first. Heavenly King, Comforter, Spirit of Truth, whatever you represent and fills of things, treasury of blessings and giver of life, come and abide us and cleanse us from every impurity, save us, also a good one. Is the quality of transmission all right? Okay. So our topics tonight are the disciples and followers' reward in Matthew, end of chapter 19, then the first and the last, Matthew, from the beginning of chapter 20, first 16 verses, then continue on with Christ talking about his death and resurrection, and finally, leaders as servants. So it's all in Matthew sequentially that we're reading tonight, with reference to what the other synoptics have to say on these topics. All right, so let's read the last couple of verses in chapter 19. Yes, 28:30. So Jesus said to them, assuredly I say to you that in the regeneration, when the Son of Man sits on the throne of his glory, you who have followed me will also sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. And everyone who has left houses or brothers or sisters, or father or mother or wife, or children or lands, for my name's sake shall receive 100-fold and inherit eternal life. But many who are first will be last, and the last first. Right. Now, the word regeneration in the original Greek text of the gospel, it says palingenesia, which is used in St. Paul's letter to Titus, chapter 3, verse 5, in the sense of baptism. Regeneration, baptism. That makes sense, doesn't it? Right. Here, however, it clearly connects with the picture of the judgment and refers to the regeneration of the whole world. That is the resurrection on the last day. Now, in other words, that word regeneration, palingenesia, has the same meaning as the word apokatastasis in Acts chapter 3, verse 21, translated as restoration of all things. You got a regeneration, restoration. The apostles who left everything in this life for the sake of Christ will participate in his glory. While all the saints, and that means Christians, that word is used in the New Testament very often in that sense. The saints are the followers of Christ, Christians. Right? Will participate in judgment. For instance, Paul writes in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 2, do you not know that the saints will judge the world? So, but what this is talking about is that the apostles have a special closeness to Christ in his judgment. Now, the image of judgment refers to not only the last judgment, but the permanent status of the apostles as participants in the glory of Christ. So the reference to the 12 tribes of Israel is an indication to the to all the people of God. So the church of all nations. Even though it's talking about the 12 tribes of Israel, it's talking about God's whole church, people of God of all the nations. But because he was talking to Israelites at that point of time, he expressed it this way. Now, verse 29, which we read, it says the theme of the renewal of the theme of the reward given to the followers is covered in more detail in Mark and Luke, who also have this topic described. Now, those evangelists clarify the point that rewards for self-sacrifice are twofold. In this life and in the age to come. That's what Luke says. Now, Mark gives a comprehensive description. And so I'll quote from Mark. I say to you, there is no one who has left home or brothers or sisters or father or mother or wife or children, lands, for my sake and the gospel's, who shall not receive 100-fold now in this time, houses and brothers and sisters and mothers and children and lands, with persecutions, and in the age to come, eternal life. All right, so as in the case of the earlier promise to the apostles, that they shall sit on the 12 thrones, these promises of houses, lands, children, etc., are to be understood, of course, on the spiritual level, not literally. So these are to be found in the spiritual consolation in church life. This applies especially with regard to the relatives who are blocking a person's path to Christ. New brothers and sisters are to be found in the church, and they will be much more loving and closer and caring than even blood relatives. And I must say here that, in my life, I've seen so many examples when there are much closer relationships between people who share the same faith and life in the church than between blood relatives. Oh, yes. And these people are just friends. Okay, but they can have much closer relationship. It's a fact. It's a fact of life. All right. So now let's read the first 16 verses of the next chapter, chapter 20. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. Now, when he had agreed with the laborers for a denarius a day, he sent them into his vineyard. And he went out about the third hour and saw others standing idle in the marketplace and said to them, "You also go into the vineyard, and whatever is right I will give you." So they went. Again, he went out about the 6th and the 9th hour and did likewise. And about the 11th hour, he went out and found others standing idle and said to them, "Why have you been standing here idle all day?" They said to him, "Because no one hired us." He said to them, "You also go into the vineyard, and whatever is right, you will receive." So when evening had come, the owner of the vineyard said to his steward, "Call the laborers and give them their wages, beginning with the last to the first." And when those came who were hired about the 11th hour, they each received a denarius. But when the first came, they supposed that they would receive more. And they likewise received each a denarius. And when they had received it, they complained against the landowner, saying, "These last men have worked only 1 hour, and you made them equal to us who've borne the burden and the heat of the day." But he answered one of them and said, "Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what is yours and go your way. I wish to give to this last man the same as to you. Is it not lawful for me to do what I wish with my own things? Or is your eye evil because I am good?" So the last will be first, and the first last. For many are called, but few chosen. There's some food for thought. Now, after giving such promises to his disciples, the Lord teaches them not to focus on the rewards as earned and just merit, as a recompense for labors. He gives the parable of the laborers in the vineyard, which is preceded with and finished with the same words. The first will be last, and the last first. The parable is about the church, of course, represented by the vineyard. The landowner is the Lord himself. Laborers who come at different times are people who come to Christ. Well, first of all, the ones who came to Christ during his 3.5 years ministry. And then for the Christians of after this time, it refers to people coming to Christ in various times of their life, in their youth or middle age or even old age. The meaning of the parable is that it is God who knows the heart of every person. He decides who is worthy of reward. People cannot compare themselves with anybody else, with others, because they have no way of knowing the inner life of others. Look, let's be serious. often enough, we don't even know our own inner life properly, let alone, the life of other people. So, what appears to be just in the worldly sense has a very different appraisal from God. Thus, this parable teaches us to think humbly and not to compare ourselves to anybody else. Whatever talents we've been given, we will only be, our efforts will be compared only to what potential we have, not to anybody else, because other people, well, we don't know. It's God knows. All right, so now the next couple of verses, 17 and 19. Now Jesus, going up to Jerusalem, took the 12 disciples aside on the road and said to them, "Behold, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be betrayed to the chief priests and to the scribes, and they will condemn him to death and deliver him to the Gentiles to mock and to scourge and to crucify. And the third day he will rise again." Now, at this point, sounds like somebody at the front door. Maybe not. I'll just open the side door and maybe they'll see it. No? Yes, there is someone. All right. Yeah, sorry about the interruption. Somebody tried to come through the front door, so it was locked. So Jesus Christ at this time with his disciples and followers, because there were other people, not just the 12, we'll see that there were some people in their group. He seems to have crossed the Jordan River on his way to Jericho, from where the road that followed the Jordan along the other bank, then crossed to Jericho and then continued on to Jerusalem. Still a road there from Jericho to Jerusalem. Yes. But the interesting thing is that, it's a very steep rise from going up from Jericho to Jerusalem, because Jericho is almost the lowest point in that deepest depression on Earth, 400 meters below sea level, okay, where the Dead Sea is. And Jerusalem is around about 800 meters above sea level. So that, add 400 and 800, you've got 1,200 meters to rise to Jerusalem from Jericho. So it's a fair bit over a short distance. It always impressed me in the parable of the Good Samaritan. Christ refers to the person going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, the other way. Sort of, whoa, a fall. It's talking about the fall of man, sort of sharp incline down. So when it became clear to the disciples that their teacher was intending to go back to Jerusalem, they were afraid. As we hear in Mark's account, and we read Matthew just now, they felt that the same as last time, not long before, when Christ went to Bethany to raise Lazarus. They were afraid then. But this time he did not comfort them as before. Before he said, don't worry, nothing's going to happen because whatever is in God's plan will not be disturbed. You know, we're going to go there to Bethany and nothing will happen. This time he did not comfort them as before. And taking them aside, he says clearly that he will be betrayed, condemned to death, crucified, and then he will rise on the third day. He walked in front of them, giving them an example of courage and showing that now that the hour had come, he voluntarily walked towards the death that he agreed to accept as an obedience from the Father. In chapter 18, verse 34, Luke writes that, and I quote, they understood none of those things. This saying was hidden from them, and they did not know the things which were spoken. All of these things about death. So Matthew and Mark give the story of the sons of Zebedee, which illustrates graphically how little they understood of what Christ had just said, literally, about his death, what he was saying to them. So let's read about that. So that's just continuation, chapter 20, verses 20 to 28. Then the mother of Zebedee's sons came to him with her sons, kneeling down and asking something from him. And he said to her, what do you wish? Now, in the English, it's not clear because English has lost the singular and plural, in address, in that pronouns. It's always plural, you, but in the original, even though she asks the question, he answers them in the plural. What do you wish? It's not to her, it's to the sons. Okay? Now that little nuances which you can pick up reading the original. Yes, she continues speaking to him. She said to him, because you see, Mark doesn't mention mother. Well, we'll be talking about that. She said to him, grant that these two sons of mine may sit, one on your right hand and the other on the left, in your kingdom. But Jesus answered and said, you do not know what you ask. It's plural all the way through. Are you able to drink the cup that I am about to drink and to be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with? They said to him, see, now they reply, we are able. So he said to them, you will indeed drink my cup and be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with. But to sit on my right hand and on my left is not mine to give, but it is for those for whom it is prepared by my Father. And when the 10 heard it, they were greatly displeased with the two brothers. But Jesus called them to himself and said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who are great exercise authority over them. Yet it shall not be so among you. But whoever desires to become great among you, let him be your servant. And whoever desires to be first among you, let him be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. All right, so that's the extent of our reading. Let's just have quite a few things to say about all of this. Yeah, so the story is similar in Matthew's and Mark's gospel, but Matthew gives the detail that was the mother of James and John who approached Jesus and spoke on their behalf. Because the brothers initiated this request, even though it was through their mother, Jesus Christ replies to them. As I said, his reply is in the plural. Perhaps the two brothers were in a slightly different frame of mind from the others. Perhaps they were impressed by the recent promise of the Lord that they would sit on the judgment thrones with him, the 12 thrones. That obviously these two brothers, but not only those two, the rest of their disciples, and understood these words in a purely superficial and worldly sense about the 12 thrones. They were imagining the kingdom of Christ as an earthly kingdom, and thought that he was now on his way to proclaim his kingdom of glory in Jerusalem. With that kind of thinking, it is not surprising that the disciples just couldn't digest and understand the words that he had said about his death in Jerusalem. James and John saw that Jesus Christ showed them, together with Peter, a special sort of love and privilege in a sense. You would remember they were chosen to accompany him in some special circumstances, for instance, in the raising of the daughter of Jairus, the governor of the ruler of the synagogue, and on Mount Tabor and Transfiguration. Yes, it's Peter, James, and John. And for this reason, they felt emboldened to ask him for this privilege, to sit on his right and left hand. Now Christ, as we heard, said to them, they did not know what they were asking. And indeed, they did not know at all. He calls his crucifixion the cup, and his death baptism. Because he was immersed completely in this death. And he connected his death with the mystery of baptism. mystery of baptism in the church, the sacrament. In the way Paul speaks about it in his letter to the Romans in chapter 6, as participation. Our baptism is participation in Christ's death and resurrection. We, God willing, will have an opportunity later in the year or sometime after Easter to talk about Christ's cup in Gethsemane, his passion, death, and resurrection in our ongoing talks. For now, with regard to the request of the two brothers, the sons of Zebedee, Christ implies, although it's not so easy to see this, that there will be two people on his right and his left in Jerusalem. They will be on the crosses. Right? So he's saying, are you ready to be with me on the cross, literally? You don't know what you're asking. So when Christ questions them about their ability to drink the cup and share in his baptism, they answer eagerly, we are able. This answer obviously comes from a total lack of understanding of his words. Then the Lord looks into the future and agrees that indeed they will share his cup and his baptism. In Acts chapter 12, we read about the persecution of the church in Jerusalem and how King Herod Agrippa had James, the older brother, beheaded with a sword and had Peter locked up in prison. But an angel miraculously led Peter out of prison at night. But James suffered, so Christ was saying that he would share in that baptism. Now, as regards their requests, the Lord's answer shows that these places on the right and the left were chosen according to the will of the Father. And if you look at the iconostasis, and at the moment, I'll use my pen to point it out on screen. Here we have a composition. I should raise my, yeah. Yes, I need to look at the camera. So here we go. Wait a minute. Oops, it's hard to judge where to point. It's really hard. It's something like a game with blindfolded, tail on the donkey. I think. Okay, so here we go. Whoops, there's that icon. That's the icon of Mother of God. So she's on Christ's right. So there's Christ on the throne, and she's on his right. And on his left is John the Baptist. Okay, so that's the that row, which is called the what's it called? It's called the prayer or the intercession, and there's in Greek. So very common in makeup of the iconostasis, because it reflects this layout of the liturgical discourse in preparation for the Eucharist, how the particles are laid out. I think I mentioned that before. No? No. Well, Christ on the throne is like, represents the Lamb on the discus. The Mother of God is the next particle on his right. Now, on his left, the first particle is St. John the Baptist, and then the rest of the saints follow. So they're spread over that's both sides of that particular tier of the iconostasis. So there you have it. Now, the Lord did not want to offend the brothers by openly refusing their request. At the same time, to grant their requests would have offended the others. Besides, the will of the Father was that, and what they did not know was that, and could not know, that there were two people much higher than them in God's kingdom. One of them higher than the cherubim and the seraphim. Wow. Now, despite the fact that Christ did not satisfy the request of James and John, their behavior elicited an angry response from the rest. Can you imagine that? How they felt? How dare you, push in. And for that reason, the Lord gives them a teaching about humility in his kingdom. Now, as I've sometimes mentioned in my talks and in church sermons even, the ancient world of the Roman Empire had these concepts of magisterium and ministerium. Now, magister means master in Latin. They have magistrate in modern English from that. Minister meant servant. Okay. Jesus Christ introduces a radically new idea of service or ministry that did not exist in the ancient world at all, because to serve was something lowly and despicable. But for Christ, service or ministry becomes an ideal in the church. The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. And you know what? This has become part of the European, at least Christian civilization, when such existed. But even though it doesn't really exist very much today, there are still many, many things in our language, in our concepts, even in world structures that go back to those times. And one of them, an expression, or an example rather of these expressions, are things like the minister of state, minister with a portfolio, say health, education, whatever. Minister, not magister. Okay, he's not a ruler, he's a servant, a public servant. And because that's become embedded in the consciousness of our civilization, Christian principle. Now, I'd just like to expand on this topic from a talk that impressed me quite a lot when I first heard it back in the 90s. It's by a very popular Russian speaker, professor at the Spiritual Academy of Moscow, which is actually located at the Lavra, way up north. Since Holy Trinity, St. Sergius Lavra monastery, that's where it's located. You know, he is not only an academic, but very gifted speaker, and he has done all big sequences, big series of talks on various topics, in theological topics. One of these topics was titled, "Why Wasn't Christ an Emperor?" It's an interesting topic. You know, now emperor in Latin, emperor. That's that word came through French into the English language. Imperator in Latin means what? Imperere in Latin means to command, to give commands. Okay, so imperator is the person who commands. Emperor. So, yes, he in his talk, he talks about the insanity of human life. He compares it to the whole of humanity to a sinking ship. Everybody on the ship knows that the ship is sinking, yet nothing is doing anything about it. No one is jumping off the ship, in little boats or even boards or inflatable mattresses. They're fighting among themselves to grab things on the ship. Well, the implication there is that everybody knows, we all know that we're going to die, but very few people actually believe or want to believe that. Other people die. I'm not going to die. Okay? Of course, I'm not going to die. Okay, it's only other people. So this insanity comes from human nature, which Christianity, which the gospel, and really the whole of the Bible recognizes as being sick. It's unwell. Our human nature is unwell. And this sickness is called mortality, death, which is present in a whole number of different manifestations. I'm not going to go into them, but the Holy Fathers talk about them as the passions, which lead to sins. So, so supposing you have an emperor, an authoritarian, or even a totalitarian system, right? What can it do? It can only try to control these expressions of human madness through fear, of severe punishments, like we have in the examples of the 20th century totalitarian regimes, historically, like Russia first, and then China, Vietnam, Cambodia, Pol Pot, Killing Fields, seen the film? Mm-hmm. So there you have it. Attempt to make people happy even against their will. But some of these passions are actually, they actually grow in authoritarian and totalitarian systems. Things like envy, treachery, dobbing people in. The state uses them, to control people. That's what, in Russia, they made a hero out of a boy who dobbed his father in, Pavlik Morozov. How terrible is that? It was a fabrication. The whole story was a fabrication. It didn't even exist, but they constructed a myth. All right. Now, Christ is not interested in becoming an emperor, never was interested in becoming the emperor of the sick humanity, because it's not going to do anything. It won't change anything. And for all of the systems and the endless recipes for human happiness, pursuit of happiness on this earth, none of these recipes work. None. And they all say, all we need to do is just change the social or political structure, and then everybody's going to be happier, or at least those who agree with us, they're going to be happy. And those who disagree, of course, we're going to get rid of them. They don't believe in our vision. But Christ's intention is to be the servant of sick humanity, in the same way that a doctor attends a patient. The doctor, in the sense, is a servant of a patient. So what's the point of commanding a humanity that is all sick? But Christ gives the ultimate medicine. He gives the medicine of immortality. Now, as he says to Nicodemus, who comes early in the piece to him at night, he says that you have to be born again. You have to be born from above, through water and the Spirit, through baptism. Okay? And that is a connection to the new Adam, Christ. So this is a connection to God, a connection to a different kind of life. Not the life of insanity on a sinking ship. So people who choose to be different, to behave differently, to live differently to those who don't want to jump ship, the sinking ship. Right? So this is why Christ explains to his disciples that it's no good trying to be, the commander, the boss, because the problem is internal. It has to be fixed first. Healing has to occur first. And for that to happen, he needs, like he explains in the parable of the Good Samaritan, and he says to the lawyer that asked the question, who is my neighbor? At the end after telling the parable, he says, he asked the lawyer, who was neighbor to the man who had fallen to the thieves, to the robbers. So the man who showed him mercy. And so the Christ says, go and do likewise, which means become a servant, to become my follower, to participate in the healing of humanity. Because the parable of the Samaritan is about healing, isn't it? About the church as a hospital. So what's the point of commanding an army of people in hospital? Not much point. And you see, the world does not understand that the church lives completely differently. You know, the world is ready to accept some of the things that the church may do, like a lot of the ideas that the state has taken up for itself, like social security, help for the aged, for the sick, for widows, for orphans. It came out of the church. It came out of Christianity. Over these hundreds of years, and now the state looks after that. But the attitude is completely different. When it happens in the context of the church, it's something personal, but in the state, it's impersonal. Okay. Well, nevertheless, we are grateful for these structures to be available in the state. That's good. But people shouldn't forget where they originate from. All right. That is it for tonight. Unless anyone has any questions. If we have no questions, that's all fine. So, God willing, same time, 7 p.m. next Sunday. All right. It is truly meet to bless thee, O Theotokos, ever blessed and most pure, the Mother of our God, more honorable than the cherubim, beyond compare, more glorious than the seraphim, who without corruption gave us birth to God, the Word, the very Theotokos, thee do we magnify.